On the 6th of March, 2018, the Association of Europe's Transmission System Operators published a number: 113 gigawatt-hours of energy that nobody generated. The same page carried a second figure in a completely different unit. Electric clocks across 25 countries were running close to 6 minutes slow. Those are not two facts about one event. They are one shortfall read on two instruments. Frequency is normally described as a balance. Generation against demand, moment to moment, 50 cycles a second in Europe and 60 in North America. Too much load and it sags. Too much generation and it rises. That description is complete for the instant. It says nothing about what happens to the instants when you add them up. A clock in an oven does not contain a crystal. It contains a small motor whose speed is locked to the alternating current arriving at the wall, and a gear train that turns rotations into minutes. The motor is not measuring time. It is counting cycles and calling the count time. So a grid running 0.004 of a hertz slow is not making an error anybody can feel. It is making an error that accumulates. Hold it for 7 weeks and the sum is 6 minutes. The energy is the same shortfall from the other end. The deficit is what one control area did not put in. The 6 minutes is what every clock in 25 countries did about it. Europe's operators put the missing energy at 113 gigawatt-hours and asked, in the next sentence, who was going to compensate for it. One shortfall, two instruments. Frequency's second job is not balance. The integral of frequency is a clock. Mid-January 2018. The average frequency of continental Europe settles below 50 Hz and stays there. The area it settles across is one machine. Spain to Turkey, Poland to the Netherlands, 25 countries, all turning in step. Europe's operators call it the Continental European Power System, and inside it every generator is locked to every other one. Their statement of the 6th of March names where the deviation came from. The control area of Serbia, Macedonia and Montenegro, and within it, specifically Kosovo and Serbia. The mechanism is ordinary and it is worth being precise about, because nothing dramatic happens. A control area that does not deliver the energy it's scheduled leaves the rest of the interconnection covering the difference out of its own machines. Those machines slow very slightly. The average frequency of the whole synchronous area drops. By how much? Europe's operators published the figure themselves. The average over the period from mid-January was around 49.996 Hz, 0.004 of a hertz. Their own frequently asked questions give the numbers that would matter. For the system to function, frequency cannot fall below 47.6 Hz or rise above 52.4. At 47.5, every connected generator and device disconnects automatically. 0.004 of a hertz is not close to any of that. It is not close to anything. Europe's operators said the deviation had never happened in any similar way in that power system before. They also, 8 months later, dated its beginning to late 2017 rather than mid-January. Both statements are theirs, and this film does not choose between them. Nothing tripped and nothing went dark. Ashland, Massachusetts, 1916. Henry Warren builds a clock with no pendulum and no escapement. The measurement paper opens on him because what he sold was not really a clock. It was a way of borrowing somebody else's clock. His electric clock ran a synchronous motor, and a synchronous motor has no opinion about speed. Its rotor is dragged around by the rotating field in its own windings, and that field turns at whatever rate the incoming current alternates. Feed it 60 cycles a second, gear it correctly, and the hands are right for as long as the 60 cycles are right. The paper's own summary of the century that followed is one sentence. Electric power companies have been a source of time and frequency reference for the public for over 100 years. Warren's company was called Telecrin, and the arrangement outlived it. The mechanism survives in the appliances nobody thinks of as clocks. Europe's operators listed them when they were asked which devices were affected. Oven clocks, the clocks that program a heating system, the ones with a display that shows the time because the appliance was going to need a timer anyway, and the cheapest timer available is the main supply. What was unaffected is everything containing a quartz crystal, because a crystal has its own oscillator and does not care what the grid is doing. A phone was right. A wristwatch was right. A computer asking a time server was right. The oven was 6 minutes behind, and it had not failed. A synchronous motor cannot be wrong. It can only be behind. May 2021. NERC Resources Subcommittee publishes its reference document on balancing and frequency control and puts the arithmetic on page 9. The worked example uses a grid running 0.02 of a hertz fast, 60.002 hertz, held for 10 hours. The document does the division and prints the answer. 1.2 seconds. That is the whole relationship, and it is worth taking apart, because the shape of it is the reason nobody notices this until it is minutes. Take the difference between actual frequency and nominal frequency. Divide it by nominal frequency, which gives a fraction. Multiply that fraction by how long it lasted. What comes out is a time. Geometrically, it is an area. The deviation is the height, the duration is the width, and the accumulated clock error is the product. The height is the part everybody looks at, and it is always tiny. 0.02 of a hertz, 0.004, numbers that no instrument in a house could resolve. The width is the part nobody looks at, and it can be 7 weeks. Take Europe's own published average of 49.996 hertz, 0.004 low, and carry it from the middle of January to the 6th of March. This film's arithmetic on their figure gives about 5.5 minutes. Their published figure was close to 6. That agreement is not a coincidence, and it is not a second measurement. It is the same measurement done twice. The height never mattered. The width did. The 3rd of April, 2018. Europe's operators report that the clocks are back on time. Their statement says how. Over the course of March, the continental European transmission system operators collectively put more energy into the system and maintained the average electric frequency at 50.01 hertz, 0.010 of a hertz high, deliberately for a month. That is the same area drawn on the other side of the line. 0.004 low for 7 weeks puts 6 minutes into the system. 0.010 high for 4 weeks takes it back out. The clocks that had been counting short began counting long, and the hands walked forward until they caught the reference. Europe's operators had described the recovery as 2 steps back in March and had been careful about the order. The first step is to cease the deviation. The second step is to compensate for the missing energy. They estimated a few weeks, and it took about a month. Then on the 9th of July, they published again. The deviations had started once more. This time the operators had built something for it. A compensation program that kicks in automatically when the grid time deviation exceeds 60 seconds, and it had done so 3 days earlier. By November, they were still describing discussions rather than an agreement. So the accumulated area became a managed quantity, with a threshold and an automatic response, and the clocks stopped being the problem. Nothing in any of those 4 statements records a single interrupted customer. The clocks were the easy part. Every year on the 1st of February, one control room in the eastern United States hands a job to another one, and the job is watching a clock. North America has done this version of the accounting for longer than Europe has had a compensation program, and the reference document describes it plainly. Each interconnection designates a reliability coordinator as its time monitor. That control room compares a clock driven off interconnection frequency against the official time provided by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. The difference between those two clocks is called time error, not frequency error. Time error in seconds. The thresholds are written down. In the Eastern interconnection, when accumulated time error reaches 10 seconds, the time monitor notifies every balancing authority to offset its scheduled frequency by 20 millihertz. 60.02 Hz if the clocks are slow, 59.98 if they are fast. The offset stays until the error has fallen back below 6 seconds. The separate procedure document adds the operating detail. A correction runs a minimum of 4 hours. It starts and ends on the hour or the half hour, with about an hour of notice. In the East, a correction for fast time is not started so that it would run through the morning load ramp. The reference document also has a table of every kind of control a grid performs: inertial, primary, secondary, tertiary, and time control at the bottom on a timescale of hours. Beside each of the first 4, there is a named NERC measurement. Beside time control, the entry reads, "Not applicable." Every other row has a number. 2009. NERC petitions the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to adopt a revised standard that would remove the requirement to perform time error corrections at all. The measurement paper reconstructs the argument from the filings because its authors were watching the docket. The first version was narrow. Time error, NERC argued, is not a reliability issue, so there should not be a requirement to correct it in a standard about reliability. As the proceeding developed, the argument got stronger and turned around completely. The claim was no longer that correction was merely unnecessary. It was that correction was harmful. In NERC words, intentionally moving away from a scheduled frequency target of 60 Hz serves no reliability purpose and effectively wastes the safety margins designed into the system by the engineers who planned it. Here is the margin they meant. In the Eastern interconnection, automatic underfrequency load shedding is armed at 59.7 Hz. That is the frequency at which relays begin disconnecting customers to save the machines. Between normal 60 Hz and that line, there is 300 millihertz of room. A time error correction for slow clocks sets scheduled frequency to 59.98. The room becomes 280 millihertz. So the correction that keeps an oven clock honest spends 20 of the 300 millihertz before a grid starts shedding load. Whether that matters is exactly the question. And NERC's own drafting team said in the docket that it was proceeding cautiously. 20 millihertz out of 300. August 2010. NERC files a motion asking the Commission to defer action on the standard NERC itself had proposed. The reason given in that motion is the most interesting sentence in this history. Research and analysis regarding time error correction is ongoing, and NERC and its stakeholders are exploring the possibility of implementing a field test to evaluate elimination of time error corrections. The results of such a field test may lead to the withdrawal of NERC request. Read what that describes. Stop correcting across a real interconnection on purpose and measure what happens to everything downstream of the grid's clock. It would have answered the question the whole argument rested on, which was never really about margins. It was, who depends on this and how would we know? The field test was never run. At the operating committee's meeting of the 6th and 7th of March, 2012, after what the record calls exhaustive discussion and debate over several months, it was determined that NERC should discontinue its pursuit of the elimination of manual time error corrections. The reasoning is quoted directly. While it was clear that eliminating time error corrections would likely have no negative impact on reliability that was insurmountable, it also became clear that the potential for other problems was largely undefined and not well understood. Largely undefined and not well understood. That is a description of a thing nobody had measured. Later that year, the Board of Trustees rescinded its approval of the revised standard, and NERC asked the Commission to withdraw the filing, reporting the changes as unnecessary. The measurement was proposed and never taken. February 2015. A periodic review team inside NERC recommends retiring the time error correction standard, and this time the recommendation is drawn narrowly. The measurement paper is careful about the difference. This was not a call to end the practice of corrections, as it had been before. It was a recommendation to retire the formally documented operating procedure under which corrections had been conducted. Retire the rule, not the habit. The recommendation went through NERC standards process, which the paper counts precisely. 3 rounds of comments, 2 rounds of balloting. A white paper written before the last round set out the case. The principal argument was the margin one, rephrased. Using manual correction to place the interconnection closer to the settings for automatic underfrequency load shedding does not support or enhance reliability. The rest of the list is worth hearing in full. Correction is a commercial service and does not require a mandatory standard. There is no documentation that it has been important since 1976. Quartz oscillators are more reliable and cheaper. Satellite time is better still. Grid frequency is not the appropriate source for alignment to official time. Manual corrections were happening less often, and newer standards would hold the grid closer to 60 Hz anyway, making correction redundant. The paper's own authors dispute the last one in a parenthesis. Smaller deviations from 60 Hz, they write, are not the same as controlling the average frequency, and controlling the average is what would actually substitute. On the 2nd of November 2016, NERC board voted to file for retirement. The petition went in a week later. The Commission approved it on the 18th of January 2017 in a delegated letter order. A continental standard ended in a letter. 2011. At the United States Naval Observatory, somebody puts a counter on the building's incoming main supply. The method is described in the measurement paper, and it is direct. Take the on-second marks of the observatory's own time scale. Take the next upward zero crossing of the alternating current arriving from the utility. Measure the interval between them every 2 seconds and keep doing it. By the time the paper was written, that instrument had accumulated over 63 million observations. A second, independent system ran alongside it for 21 months and added 5.5 million more at 1-second intervals. What appears in that data is the rulebook, seen from outside. The corrections show up as frequency outliers, confirmed as intentional against records supplied by NERC Resources Subcommittee. From outside, the authors observed corrections of 20 mHz running up to 14 hours, started when the offset reached about 10 seconds and halted at about 6. 10 seconds and 6 seconds. The same 2 numbers the reference document prints, arrived at by watching a wall socket. One outlier in the record was not a correction. Over that stretch, the time advanced by more than 4 seconds, and nobody had ordered it. Then the authors did the subtraction. Summing the corrections actually made, a clock set right at the start of daylight saving time in March 2016 would have been about 7.5 minutes off when standard time returned in November. 7.5 minutes in the eastern United States, in one 8-month stretch in an ordinary year. The paper reports the cost honestly. The long-term stability corrections buy comes with a slight degradation of frequency stability over hours and days. That paper was presented at the end of January 2017. The number arrived 12 days late. October 2018. The Commission proposes to finish the job by retiring the commercial half of time error correction as well. The reliability standard was gone. The business practice standard was not. Time error correction had always existed in 2 places at once, and the second copy lived with the North American Energy Standards Board, which writes the commercial procedures utilities follow when they trade. The proposal was to remove that copy and to delete the definitions of time error and time error correction from the glossary. NERC supported it, arguing that removal ensures clarity and avoids inadvertent, uncoordinated correction. A regional transmission operator agreed. 2 people objected. They filed as private citizens, not on behalf of anyone. One is a senior scientific advisor in the Physical Measurement Laboratory at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. The other is chief scientist for time services at the United States Naval Observatory. They are the same 2 who had put the counter on the wall socket. Their argument was that, without correction, synchronous clocks and appliances will not be accurate or work properly, and that regulating the grid more tightly to 60 Hz does not substitute for correcting accumulated error. In February 2020, the Commission decided it would not adopt the proposal. The Standards Board, it found, had not provided sufficient justification for retiring time error correction as a business standard. The only support offered was that NERC had retired the corresponding reliability standard as unnecessary for reliability. The 2 scientists, the Commission wrote, raised considerable unrebutted concerns. So the commercial standard was written back into the regulations, and utilities were advised to revisit the rationale for removing it. One argument the Commission declined to hear was the one about the reliability standard itself, ruled outside the proceeding. The reliability half stayed retired. January 2025. A regional standard on automatic time error correction is filed for revision in the Western Interconnection, where it has never stopped being mandatory. Its stated purpose is to maintain Western frequency and ensure that time error accumulation is paid back without harming reliability. Its first requirement carries a violation risk factor of severe, the highest of 3. The background section notes that the practice predates mandatory standards altogether. Versions of the Western procedure for time error control predate 1980. Quebec and Texas minimize time error automatically as well, so the accounting never stopped anywhere. What stopped, in January 2017, was one obligation in 2 interconnections. The manual procedure still has its document. Version 5, approved by NERC Operating Committee in December 2019. 4 pages. It names the 20 mHz offset, the 4-hour minimum, the rule about the morning load ramp, and a rota of which control room holds the job 1 year each, published out to 2031. The first footnote on its first page says the document is provided for guidance and does not reflect binding norms or mandatory requirements. Everything needed to correct the clocks of a continent is written down, current and optional, which leaves the question the field test would have answered, still open. NERC own reference document put it in 1 sentence in 2021. While the value of time control is debatable from a reliability perspective, nobody can say with assurance who or what would be impacted if the practice of manual time error corrections were halted. That is not a disagreement about physics. Everyone in this story agrees on the arithmetic. It is a system that removed an obligation without ever finding out who was leaning on it. Nobody can say who would be affected.